Under the grey skies of late October 2025, the Kremlin once again became the stage for a major geopolitical signal. Cameras captured Russian President Vladimir Putin signing a thick blue-bound document, its embossed gold letters reading Treaty on Strategic Partnership between the Russian Federation and the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. The signing, confirmed on 27 October, formally ratified a sweeping agreement between Moscow and Caracas, deepening political, military and economic cooperation between the two countries. It marks the first comprehensive strategic treaty between them since the early 2000s, when Russia supplied the first generation of Sukhoi fighter jets and surface-to-air systems to Venezuela under Hugo Chavez. Russian state officials described the accord as a long-term anchor of bilateral trust. But for many observers abroad, it is a sharp reminder that Moscow's global outreach is far from confined to Eastern Europe or Asia. In a televised statement, Putin's press office summarized the new law as one designed to provide a sustainable and reliable basis for cooperation across multiple fronts, ranging from energy development and infrastructure to defense technology and cultural exchange. The document had been originally signed in Moscow on 7 May 2025 during President Nicolás Maduro's official visit to the Kremlin. That visit, seen at the time as symbolic, is now confirmed as the foundation for a durable alliance. In the words of the Russian leader himself, it creates a sustainable and reliable basis for multidimensional bilateral ties and long-term development. Vladimir Putin, president of Russia, that phrase, multidimensional bilateral ties, has since become shorthand in Moscow's diplomatic circles for a new generation of Russian partnerships outside of NATO's traditional sphere. Officials in the Russian Foreign Ministry highlight that the agreement mirrors other strategic documents signed with China and India, effectively bringing Latin America into what they describe as the Eurasian security and cooperation orbit. Not long after Putin's signature dried, US officials in Washington expressed unease. Senior State Department spokespeople confirmed that the United States had serious concerns about any potential transfer of Russian military assets to Venezuelan territory. In remarks carried by multiple outlets, the Pentagon emphasized that any deployment of offensive Russian systems to the Western Hemisphere would be viewed as a direct provocation. Anonymous US defense officials speaking to Reuters went further, saying that US surveillance aircraft had been ordered to closely monitor Russian cargo flights reportedly landing in La Guaira and Maracay over the past month. From Moscow's perspective, those warnings amounted to political theater. The Kremlin's line has been consistent. Russia and Venezuela are sovereign states entitled to mutual defense cooperation, and no third party has the right to dictate the scope of that partnership. Addressing reporters in the Kremlin's St. George Hall, a senior Russian spokesperson reiterated Moscow's position with deliberate clarity. Of course, we support the Venezuelan officials in defending national sovereignty. We are in contact with our partners and are ready to respond to their requests, taking into account existing and potential threats. Vladimir Putin, president of Russia. That statement was not improvised. Insiders close to Russia's National Security Council later confirmed that it reflects the language used in the classified annexes of the treaty itself, sections that outline mechanisms for intelligence sharing, training exchanges, and potential joint exercises in coastal security. In simpler terms, Russia is signaling readiness to treat any attack on Venezuela's sovereignty as a matter of bilateral concern, without necessarily promising direct military intervention. Analysts say it is a strategic ambiguity, similar to what Moscow maintains in its relations with Syria and Belarus. For decades, Russia and Venezuela have shared a history of pragmatic cooperation that transcends ideology. During the early 2000s, the late President Hugo Chavez courted Moscow as a counterweight to Washington, purchasing billions of dollars worth of Russian military equipment. Those contracts made Venezuela the largest Latin American operator of Russian-built armored vehicles and aircraft. In 2019, when Caracas faced mass protests and US sanctions, Russian advisors helped stabilize the Venezuelan power grid and financial systems. By 2025, the two nations had already been exchanging technical teams in oil refining, satellite mapping, and cybersecurity. This new treaty, therefore, does not emerge in a vacuum. It formalizes a long-running pattern of deepening trust. The Kremlin statement was couched in diplomatic phrasing, but the intent was unmistakable. Russia wanted the world to see that its partnerships extend well beyond its traditional spheres of influence. In one of his remarks during the ratification ceremony, Putin said, "We will continue to work shoulder to shoulder, looking toward the future. We have overcome many different challenges, and we are ready for everything." Vladimir Putin, president of Russia. To his domestic audience, that sounded like an affirmation of Russia's resilience amid Western sanctions. To international analysts, it was a veiled declaration that Russia's reach in the global south is expanding. Venezuelan officials quickly echoed the sentiment. Foreign Minister Ivan Gil hailed the ratification as a victory for sovereignty and multipolarism, while President Maduro used his weekly television broadcast to emphasize that Venezuela does not seek confrontation but respect. He told the audience that our strategic alliance with Russia guarantees peace, energy development, and technological sovereignty. Nicolás Maduro, president of Venezuela. That line, guarantees peace, was carefully chosen. Maduro faces continued domestic economic pressure and international isolation. The Russian partnership offers him both symbolic legitimacy and tangible benefits. New oil field investments, potential access to Russian grain supplies, and importantly, a political lifeline amid sanctions. Beyond military symbolism, the treaty carries concrete economic incentives. It allows joint ventures between Russian state-owned enterprises such as Rosneft and Rostec and Venezuelan state firms in oil, mining, and infrastructure. Russian economists note that Venezuela's vast reserves of rare earths and heavy crude make it a valuable partner as Moscow seeks alternative export markets following the tightening of Western embargoes. The agreement also provides for currency settlements in rubles and bolivars, bypassing the US dollar system. That clause alone is viewed by Western financial analysts as a potential challenge to existing sanctions regimes. Energy experts estimate that Russian investment in Venezuela's petroleum sector could exceed $8 billion over the next 5 years, focusing on the Orinoco Belt's heavy crude processing facilities. The most sensitive section of the treaty, Article 12, authorizes the two governments to conduct joint training, logistical support, and maritime security cooperation. While it stops short of establishing a permanent Russian base, it leaves room for the rotation of naval and air units during bilateral exercises. Satellite imagery analyzed by open-source groups in October 2025 showed increased construction activity near Venezuela's Puerto Cabello naval base. Moscow has not officially commented, but defense watchers believe Russian technicians are helping upgrade radar installations and maintenance hangars there. In Washington, those developments revived memories of the Cold War. Several members of Congress called for a strong regional deterrent, with some urging the Biden administration to expand security cooperation with Colombia and Guyana. The U.S. Southern Command, headquartered in Florida, has since intensified patrols in the Caribbean Sea. For Russia, Venezuela's strategic location provides leverage in global diplomacy. It allows Moscow to demonstrate that U.S. influence in Latin America is no longer unchallenged. But the Kremlin has been careful not to escalate rhetoric beyond the point of confrontation. Russian Foreign Ministry sources described Washington's warnings as predictable but unfounded. Moscow's diplomats emphasized that every clause of the new partnership conforms to international law and that the cooperation is defensive, not aggressive. We have always respected the sovereignty of states in Latin America, and our partnership with Venezuela follows the same principle, a senior Russian envoy told reporters in Geneva. Still, behind the diplomatic restraint lies a clear message. Russia intends to maintain a presence wherever it finds willing partners. Across Latin America, reactions have been mixed. In Havana, Cuban officials praised the move as another step toward a multipolar world. In Brasilia, Brazil's foreign ministry expressed concern, saying that any new military alignment near the Caribbean must promote stability, not tension. Colombia, a close U.S. ally, called the treaty a cause for vigilance, while Mexico adopted a neutral stance, emphasizing dialogue and non-intervention. Regional economists, meanwhile, point out that the partnership could reopen shipping lanes and energy projects that had been stalled for years, potentially revitalizing trade between South America and Eurasia. For Washington, the optics are sensitive. The U.S. has long regarded the Western Hemisphere as a security priority, enshrined in doctrines dating back to Monroe in 1823. A formalized Russian military partnership in Latin America challenges that assumption directly. Analysts at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, argue that the treaty gives Moscow a symbolic foothold rather than a functional one. Still, symbolism matters. It signals that Russia can project influence globally despite sanctions and war fatigue. Some defense analysts in Europe go further, suggesting the move serves as geopolitical counterpressure, a reminder that if NATO expands in Eastern Europe, Russia can cultivate alliances closer to US borders. Internally, the decision aligns with Putin's broader strategy of diversifying Russia's global partnerships since 2022. With European markets largely closed, Moscow has prioritized the global south as its new diplomatic frontier. Deals with African and Middle Eastern states have multiplied. Latin America was the missing piece. The Venezuela Treaty fills that gap. It extends Russia's strategic reach into a hemisphere historically dominated by US policy. For Putin's administration, it is a demonstration of endurance, proof that Russia can still craft long-term international frameworks despite geopolitical isolation. Officials in Moscow frame it as part of a post-Western architecture. That phrase has appeared repeatedly in the foreign policy speeches of Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, who described the Venezuela partnership as a model for equitable cooperation in the new multipolar order. In Caracas, the ratification was celebrated as a political triumph. State TV broadcast images of crowds waving Russian and Venezuelan flags outside Miraflores Palace. Commentators described the treaty as the dawn of a new sovereignty. For Maduro, whose government continues to face internal dissent and international sanctions, the alliance offers validation. The treaty projects strength, aligning Venezuela with a major power that openly opposes US hegemony. Critics, however, warn that deeper dependence on Russia could limit Venezuela's diplomatic flexibility. Some economists argue that while Russian investment provides short-term relief, it may not replace lost Western capital or technology in key sectors. Beyond geopolitics, the treaty envisions cooperation in three notable areas: energy development, joint ventures in oil refining and petrochemicals, modernization of existing facilities in the Orinoco Belt and Zulia. Space and technology, Russia's Roscosmos will assist in establishing Venezuela's first regional satellite control center. Cultural exchange, expanded scholarships for Venezuelan students at Russian universities, and reciprocal cultural festivals to mark 80 years of friendship between the two nations in 2026. These initiatives are designed to make the partnership more visible to ordinary citizens rather than confined to diplomatic communiques. Western analysts view the timing as strategic. Coming months after intensified US sanctions and NATO's expansion of defense commitments in Europe, Moscow's outreach to Venezuela underscores Russia's intent to globalize its counter-sanctions network. The Financial Times described the treaty as a geopolitical message wrapped in an economic package. Others in Washington fear it could lead to a new era of strategic shadowboxing between great powers on opposite sides of the equator. Still, few believe it heralds a full-scale military confrontation. Most expect the partnership to unfold gradually through trade, training, and symbolic visits, rather than overt deployments. This latest Russian move coincides with similar outreach efforts across the global south. In September 2025, Moscow renewed a defense memorandum with Egypt. In October, it delivered a batch of anti-drone systems to Mali. And in November, the Kremlin hosted a summit of the Friends of BRICS Plus initiative, where Latin American ministers, including Venezuela's Ivan Gil, participated. Together, these developments suggest a deliberate pattern. Russia is building concentric circles of partnership that collectively challenge Western-centric global structures. For now, Moscow has refrained from publicizing any specific troop movements or arms deliveries linked to the Venezuelan treaty. But both governments have confirmed that their defense ministers will meet in early 2026 to plan the first joint exercises under the new framework. The exercises are expected to focus on maritime patrol, disaster response, and counter-piracy operations in Caribbean waters, a diplomatically acceptable format that nonetheless enhances interoperability between Russian and Venezuelan forces. In private briefings, Russian military analysts insist that Moscow's goal is not confrontation, but presence, making sure its flag, ships, and technology are visible across multiple regions simultaneously. The ratification of the Russia-Venezuela Strategic Partnership Treaty may appear on the surface as a routine diplomatic act. but its implications stretch far beyond the document itself. It embodies the reconfiguration of global power lines, the recalibration of alliances, and the enduring ambition of both nations to resist external pressure. As Vladimir Putin declared, we will continue to work shoulder to shoulder, looking toward the future. And as Nicolás Maduro echoed, our strategic alliance guarantees peace and sovereignty. Between those lines lies the essence of a 21st century partnership, part defiance, part necessity, and wholly symbolic of a world once again defined by great power competition.